Hello there, welcome to lesson number 5 in our series on creating bracelets using FluidDesigner for 3D printing. In today's lesson we're going to use a Twisted Torus mesh to create a bracelet. So if you start up FluidDesigner, your opening screen should look something like this, and if we go to Learning Projects and Jewellery Projects Bracelets, we're going to do lesson number 05, so it's 05, the Twisted Torus, and we're going to drag and drop that onto the workspace. So this is the object that we're going to create in today's lesson, or we're going to recreate. And how we're going to do it? Well, first of all I'm going to switch on screencast keys, so any key presses I make should be displayed in the window just down here. And then also remind you that the instructions on how to do this are in the help panel here. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to add a mesh, a torus object, and a twisted torus is what we're going to use. So add mesh, torus object, and it's a twisted torus mesh that we're going to create. Now this object is really very small at the moment. As you can see, it's only 2.5 by 2.5 millimeters. So if we go view and zoom to selected, you can see that's the default object that's created. And at the moment it's 2.5 millimeters from the outside of the object right across to the other side, in other words the external diameter. 2.5 millimeters external diameter in the Y dimension. The green is the Y, red is the X. And the blue arrow is the Z dimension, so this height is 0.5 millimeters. Now where do those values come from? Well, if we look in here, we've got major radius of 1, minor radius of 0.25. Well, the major radius is actually the radius from the center here to the middle of the object, so that's 1. 0.25 is the additional 0.25 to take you to the outer edge of the object. So that gives you 1 to the middle of the object plus 0.25, so that's 1.25. And if you double 1.25, you get 2.5 to be the diameter, the external diameter in the X dimension. Now the object that we're going to create is a bracelet, so it's obviously got to be a lot bigger than this object. So we need to change the major radius. Now we need to change it to 30. I'll just drag the bar. I'm holding down the left mouse button and dragging the mouse, and as you can see, the effect of that is to increase the internal radius, of this object, this Twisted Torus. To get an exact value of 30 in there, it's better to type it, so I'm going to type a value of 30. Okay, so we've got a 30 millimeter major radius. So 30 millimeters is from the center to the middle point of the object, plus an extra 0.25 as the minor radius, so 30.25 is the radius in this direction, plus another 30.25 in that, gives us a total X dimension of 60.5. That's actually the external diameter of the object. So there's the 30. Now we want to change the minor radius. Now if I just zoom in here, if I just change this value slowly, you can see the minor radius is thickening up the tube, the Twisted Torus tube. We want it at a value of 2, so if I enter in a value of 2, what we should find is that the Z value is 4 millimeters, so that's twice this value. And the X and the Y dimension now, well, we've got 30 millimeters to the middle of the tube, plus another 2 millimeters, so that's 32 millimeters from the center to the outside of this. And 32 millimeters on the other side gives you a total of 64 millimeters. So that's where these values come from. We now want to change the major segments from 48 down to 10. So let's just zoom in and let's see what happens as we change this value down. We'll notice it better as we get smaller. These here are the major segments. At the moment we've got 17 major segments around this object, so if we count each of these all the way around, we should have 17. We want to take it right down to 10. So if we look around the object now, there should be 10 segments around the object. So those are the major segments. Now we're doing a Twisted Torus bracelet here today, and if we look at the faces around the outside of this object here, the minor segments are the number of faces around the outside of the object. If I increase this value dramatically, that should smooth off this face. As I take it right down to 3, what I've got is just 1, 2, and underneath one more, I've just got 3 faces around the object. So 4 will have 4 faces around it, 5 will be 5 faces around it. Now we want minor segments of 3, so in other words we've got a kind of triangular cross section to our object here. Oops, can't move it. So we've got a kind of triangular cross section. In terms of twists, it is a twisted torus this, so if we were to follow a face around the object, we would find that it comes back on itself. That's what the twist is. We're going to leave the number of twists as 1. Okay. So now that we have set all of these values here, we can close this window away. What do we want to do now? Well, the next thing that we can do is we can delete the original object. We can highlight that and press the X key on the keyboard and delete it. This is the one that we've created today. Now, as is usual with bracelets, you do need to know what the exact inner diameter that you require is. So if we assume that the inner diameter that you require is 60 millimeters, one way to actually resize this down to 60 millimeters is to add a mesh and add a cylinder. And if we set the X value to 60 mm, 60 millimeters, and the Y value to 60 mm, 60 millimeters, and if we just increase the Z value slightly, what we've got there is a cylinder with a diameter of 60 millimeters. So we want to modify our Twisted Torus so that it just fits on the outside of this object. So what we need to do is to go view and view it from the top, and I need to zoom in on this, and I'll just move that panel out of the way there. Now at the moment, if you look here, we're in top and perspective mode. It's not a good idea to do this in perspective mode because you're not looking at it in a kind of flat way. You're looking at it as though it's in perspective, so you see it going into the distance. So if we go to view and if we toggle from perspective to ortho, toggle from perspective to ortho, we can now click on the Twisted Torus itself, and we can double check that it is the Twisted Torus that we've highlighted. And what we want to do is we want to scale this object up now so that it just fits around this 60 millimeter diameter cylinder. So if we press S for scale and we just move the mouse out slightly, not always easy to do this, there it is, it's just about touching around that cylinder. So I've resized the Twisted Torus so that it's now got an internal diameter of 60 millimeters. Now whenever you resize in FluidDesigner, you've always got to be careful. These values here, these vector values, these scale values will change from 1. was different value depending upon how much you scale this. We've always got to reset the scale to 1 to print, and you do that by holding down the control key and pressing A and apply the scale. And when you do that, these values will be reset to 1. So it's something you need to remember in FluidDesigner. So the scale has been reapplied back to 1 now. You must do it, otherwise you could end up with printing problems. So if we now highlight the cylinder, make sure it is the cylinder that's highlighted, and press the X key on the keyboard to delete it. There's our Twisted Torus now. What we need to do is to save it, and we do that by going to File and always go to Save As. Go up through the menu system, go to My Projects, Jewellery Projects, Bracelets, and save lesson 05 as a Blender file. As is always the case in FluidDesigner, you can't print Blender files, so you need to export it. We choose to use the Wavefront OBJ format, and if I export it to the desktop as lesson 05 Twisted Torus object, I can then go to the application Netfab Basic, and we always recommend you run this application. So go to Project and Open, go to the desktop, open lesson 05 Twisted Torus. There's no warning red triangle, so it should be okay, this object. But always go to Extras and repair the part. Netfab will triangulate these faces. Netfab has in fact added those lines there. Okay, across the faces it's triangulated the faces. And always click on Update, check that there are no border edge or orientation problems or holes. Even though there aren't any, we'd always still recommend you run Repair and Update again. Still no problems, but apply the repair and remove the old part. Now there will be times when you come to Netfab when there are problems, and Netfab will pretty much sort them out for you automatically. So there's our object now. So what we can do is export it as a wavefront object again with the additional name repaired. So when you save that, that is the file that you should send to the printer. So there's how we can create a Twisted Torus bracelet and set the internal diameter. Thank you, that's the end of this lesson.